My son once told his wife I was nothing but a burden. He didn't know I was listening, and he certainly didn't know that almost everything he owned, his house, his car, even his business, existed because of me. That night, I made a quiet promise. If I was such a burden, I'd take back everything I'd ever given him, piece by piece. People think heartbreak only comes from romance. They're wrong. The deepest cuts come from the people you die for. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the smell of roast chicken used to fill the whole house when my wife was alive. Michael and Isabella had invited me over for lunch. At least, that's what I thought. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a smile, wearing the sweater Michael had given me 2 Christmases ago. I'd spent the morning polishing my old shoes, humming along to the radio, feeling useful again, needed. We ate, we talked. Well, they talked. Isabella scrolled through her phone between bites, and Michael's mind seemed elsewhere. I tried to fill the silence, telling an old story about the time I'd accidentally driven our family car into the neighbor's hedge. Michael barely chuckled. After lunch, I excused myself to use the bathroom. That's when I heard it. I can't keep doing this, Michael's voice murmured from the kitchen. I know, Isabella replied. He's a burden, Mike. He doesn't pay rent. He's always here. We have our own lives to live. A burden. The word landed in my chest, like a brick dropped into water, heavy and sinking fast. I stood there, frozen. My own son, the boy I'd worked double shifts for, the man whose first home had been paid for, in part by me, was calling me dead weight behind my back. He wasn't wrong that I lived with them now. After my hip surgery, my savings had taken a beating, and Michael had insisted, Dad, stay with us. We'll help you recover. I thought it was love. Turns out, it was a temporary arrangement in their eyes, one that had overstayed its welcome. I went back to the table, keeping my face neutral, not a word about what I'd heard. But inside, something shifted. The man who'd sacrificed everything for his son was gone, and in his place was someone colder, quieter, and ready to even the scales. The rest of that Sunday felt like walking through a fog I couldn't shake. Michael's words replayed in my head like a broken record. He's a burden. The syllables were small, almost gentle, but the weight of them, it was crushing. You can spend your whole life thinking you understand where you stand in someone's heart, only to find out you've been standing in the wrong place entirely. I sat at their dining table, my coffee turning cold in my hands, as Michael and Isabella chatted about some upcoming trip to the coast. I didn't hear the details. My mind was stuck on everything I had done to keep my son's life from falling apart, and how easily he debrushed it aside. Memories that hurt more than they comfort. It's funny, when you're hurt, your mind doesn't go blank. It gets flooded. In that moment, I wasn't just a father at the table. I was also the man who worked 16-hour shifts at the mill so Michael could attend the best private school in the county. I was the man who skipped new clothes for myself every winter so he could have the latest sneakers and not feel left out among his friends. I was the man who, without hesitation, handed over my savings when he and Isabella wanted a down payment for this very house. And yet, in the quiet space between the sound of his fork and Isabella's laugh, I was just a burden. The ride home, when lunch was over, Michael offered to drive me back to their guest house, a small converted garage space behind their home where I'd been staying since my surgery. I nodded, thanked Isabella for lunch, and walked slowly to the car. My hip still ached, though I was healing well. But today, the limp wasn't just physical. The ride was silent for the first few minutes, save for the hum of the engine. I glanced at Michael's profile. The same strong jaw his mother loved to tease. The same brown eyes that once looked at me like I was a hero. Now those eyes seemed distant, distracted. I wanted to ask him why. Why would he say that? Did he truly feel that way? But something inside me told me not to. Words spoken in anger can sometimes be forgiven. Words spoken in truth cannot. When we reached the driveway, he mumbled something about having a lot of work this week and maybe needing some space, vague enough to avoid confrontation, but pointed enough that I understood. A night without sleep that night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't make my usual cup of tea. I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. I thought about my late wife, Marlene. She'd always said I had a habit of giving too much money, too much time, too much of myself. You can't keep bailing him out forever, she warned more than once. One day, he'll forget how much you've done. And when that happens, it'll break you. I used to laugh, tell her she didn't understand the bond between a father and son. Now, sitting alone in that dim little room, I realized she'd been right all along. The ledger of sacrifice. Some people keep scrapbooks. I kept receipts. Not on purpose. I am not petty enough to track my love in numbers, but because I am old-fashioned and keep everything in labeled folders. That night, I pulled out the worn filing box from under the bed and began leafing through it. 1998, Michael's college tuition. Paid in full, $42,000. 2003, wedding expenses when Isabella's family couldn't, $18,500. Those Mil Ochon co-signed mortgage, covering the 20% down payment, $64,000. 2012, loan to save his failing business, $25,000. There were more, smaller amounts, emergency cash here and there, credit card bills I quietly paid when he was drowning. Looking at those numbers, I didn't feel pride anymore. I felt foolish, because in all those transactions, there was no contract, no agreement. Just my blind faith that love would be enough to make him remember. The shift, sometime after midnight, something inside me clicked, not in a burst of anger. I wasn't pacing the room or clenching my fists. No, this was quieter, colder, the kind of realization that slides in and settles deep in your bones. If my son truly saw me as a burden, then perhaps I should relieve him of me. Not just my presence, but my influence, my help, my protection, my money. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to argue. All I needed to do was stop giving, and then start taking back. Planting the first seed. The first thing I did was pull out the documents for the mortgage. My name was still on it. Co-signer guarantor, the one who had made the bank say yes when their credit said no. I thought about how, in his mind, this house was his. But legally, it wasn't that simple. And legally, I still had power. My hand hovered over my phone that night, tempted to call the bank right then and there. But no. Revenge, if it's to be satisfying, is best served with precision, not impulse. Instead, I made a list. A quiet inventory of every connection, every account, every obligation Michael still had to me. And as I wrote each one down, I could feel the hurt in my chest turning into something else entirely. A cold determination I hadn't felt in years. A silent goodbye. When morning came, I greeted Michael and Isabella with the same polite smile I'd always worn. I thanked Isabella for the leftovers she'd left in the fridge, asked Michael about his work schedule, and even offered to water the plants while they were away on their coastal trip. Inside, though, I was already gone. I was no longer the father who jumped to rescue his son. I was the man who was going to show him what life without me, and without everything I'd ever given, truly looked like. Revenge isn't a sprint. It's a chess match. Every move matters. Every decision has to feel casual enough to pass unnoticed, yet calculated enough to set the trap in motion. By the time Michael and Isabella left for their little coastal vacation, I already had my opening move in mind. I didn't rush. I let them pack their bags, wave goodbye, and drive off, thinking everything was fine. That's the thing about people who take you for granted. They never imagine you might be the one holding the scissors to the strings they read dangling from the mortgage card. The morning after they left, I called my bank. The voice on the other end recognized me instantly. "Mr. Hartley, we haven't heard from you in a while. How's the hip doing?" Small talk aside, I got to the point. I wanted to discuss the mortgage I had co-signed for my son. I reminded them, in my most pleasant tone, that I was the guarantor, meaning if payments stopped, I was legally responsible. "Well, the account's in good standing," the banker said. "Yes," I replied, "and that's precisely why I'd like to review my obligations. Circumstances have changed, and I no longer wish to remain financially tied to the property." I could hear the slight pause in her voice. She knew exactly what that meant. Removing myself wouldn't be easy. Michael would need to refinance or assume the loan himself. And given his patchy credit history, that was going to be a problem. Why, the mortgage was the perfect first strike, you see. Michael had always assumed the house was untouchable. He thought my signature on that mortgage was just a formality, a harmless stamp of approval from dear old Dad. But the truth was simple. The bank had only approved it because of me. Without my name, they'd take one look at his credit score and laugh him out of the building. And I knew something else. Their monthly payments weren't exactly easy for them to manage. A refinance at today's interest rates that could double their payments overnight. I didn't have to take the house. I just had to make keeping it very, very uncomfortable. The business safety net. While I was on a roll, I pulled out another folder from my box. The one labeled M&H Automotive. That was Michael's little auto repair business. It had been his dream since he was a teenager, and I'd supported it in every way I could. Silent, yes, but not powerless. A quick call to my lawyer confirmed what I already knew. As a partner, I could demand a full audit of the company's finances. Michael kept sloppy books, and an audit would expose every missed payment, every late fee, every unreported cash transaction. It wouldn't shut him down directly, but the IRS might. Keeping it quiet, the beauty of this kind of revenge is in the silence. Michael didn't know I'd made the mortgage call. He didn't know my lawyer was drafting a letter to his business demanding records. When he called me from the coast to check in, I asked about the weather, told him the plants were fine, and even joked about how I might eat all the cookies Isabella had left in the pantry. He laughed, unaware that the ground beneath his feet had already started to shift. The third lever. Insurance. While digging through my files, I found something I hadn't thought about in years. An old life insurance policy I'd taken out in both our names, back when Michael was just starting his business. It was meant as security for him. If something happened to me, with the business listed as the beneficiary. Here's the thing about life insurance policies. Beneficiaries can be changed. And so they were. One quiet afternoon, I drove to the insurance office and signed the paperwork to remove Michael's business as a beneficiary. If he didn't know it existed, he wouldn't notice it was gone. But if things went badly and he suddenly needed that policy, he'd find out exactly how alone he really was. Rehearsing the end game. By the end of the week, I had 3 levers pulled halfway down: the mortgage, the business audit, and the insurance. Each one was its own kind of fuse, and I could decide when to light them fully. But revenge isn't just about tearing someone down. It's about making them feel the absence of your support. So while I set the financial dominoes in place, I also started removing the small things, the invisible help he'd taken for granted. I stopped covering their utility bills when they ran short. I stopped buying groceries just to help out. I stopped giving him advice on the business, even when he asked. It was amazing how quickly the cracks started to show. The first sign he knew something was wrong. Michael called me one Tuesday evening, his voice tighter than usual. "Dad, did you talk to the bank? They called me today about the mortgage, saying something about refinancing." I let a pause hang in the air. "Yes. I think it's time you took full ownership of it, Mike. You're doing well enough now." "Well enough? Dad, you know we can't afford." "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You're not a burden, remember." The silence that followed was delicious. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to explain. I just let him sit with the knowledge that I'd heard him, and that this was no accident. The shift in his voice. Over the next few days, his calls became more frequent. First about the mortgage, then about the audit letter from my lawyer. "Dad, what is this? Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything," I said softly. "I'm just stepping back." I could hear it in his tone. The first hints of panic. The son who had called me a burden was suddenly realizing how much weight I'd been carrying for him all along. By the end of that week, I knew something for certain. Michael's safety net was gone, and soon he was going to feel the fall. The thing about pulling support from someone who never stood on their own is this: they just wobble, they collapse, and Michael's collapse started faster than even I had anticipated. The mortgage fallout, it began with the bank. 3 weeks after my call, Michael received the official refinancing notice. The letter didn't just outline the new payment terms. It screamed them. The new monthly payment was almost $1,200 higher. The interest rate had doubled. I wasn't there when he opened it, but I can imagine the look on his face. That letter meant two things. Either they found a way to come up with the extra money each month, or they risked foreclosure. And the best part, this wasn't me taking his home. This was the system doing what the system does when you no longer have a strong enough backer. I didn't need to play the villain. I just needed to stop playing the hero. The business audit hits the audit letter I'd set in motion landed on his desk the same week. I know because he stormed into the guest house. The first unannounced visit in months. Waving the paper like it was a death sentence. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he demanded. I looked up from my book and kept my tone mild. "It's an audit request. I'm a partner, remember. I have the right to see the books. You're trying to ruin me." "I'm just exercising my rights," I said. "Like you said, you have your own life to live. I'm just stepping away from mine in yours." The anger on his face wasn't just from the audit, it was fear. Michael had always been terrible with paperwork, cutting corners wherever he could. The thought of having those books examined by professionals probably made his stomach twist into knots. Isabella starts to break. I didn't expect Isabella to call me. She never did, unless it was about dinner plans or to ask if I could watch their dog. But 2 days after Michael's outburst, my phone rang. "Dennis," she said, her voice tight. "What's going on?" "Michael's saying you're sabotaging us." "I'm not sabotaging anything," I replied evenly. "I'm simply removing myself from certain obligations. If that causes problems, perhaps those problems were always there." There was silence on the line. I could almost hear her doing the math in her head, realizing just how much of their lifestyle had been propped up by me. By the end of the call, her voice had shifted, less defensive, more uncertain. The little things add up. It wasn't just the big hits. I stopped quietly paying off their credit card balances when they went over. I stopped topping up their checking account when they were waiting for a payment to clear. When the power bill arrived late, I didn't rush to cover it. And the following week, they experienced their first blackout in years. One evening, I heard them arguing through the thin walls separating my guest house from the main home. "Why didn't you tell me we couldn't pay the gas bill?" Isabella's voice was sharp. "I didn't think it would matter," Michael snapped back. "Well, it matters now. Your father isn't bailing us out anymore." I sat there in the dark, a quiet smile on my face. The beautiful part of revenge isn't always the destruction. Sometimes, it's watching people realize they built their castle on someone else's foundation, and that the foundation is gone. The first public embarrassment, the real shift, came at the country club. Michael had kept his membership there for appearances. It was where he networked for business and kept up the illusion of success. But those fees weren't cheap. I knew because I'd been the one covering them for the last 2 years. Without my payments, the club didn't hesitate. At their Friday night dinner in front of friends and business contacts, Michael was approached by the club manager and informed, politely but loudly enough for others to hear, that his membership was suspended until his overdue balance was cleared. I wasn't there, but I heard about it the next day from one of my old friends who happened to be present. They cut him off mid-conversation. My friend chuckled. You should have seen his face. Michael's first visit to beg. A week later, he came to me again, but this time, the anger was gone. He stood in the doorway of my small living space, shoulders slumped, looking more like the boy I'd once taught to ride a bike than the man who called me a burden. "Dad, I messed up," he said quietly. "I didn't mean what I said that day. I was stressed. Isabella was stressed. We weren't thinking straight." I let him speak. I didn't offer him a seat. I need help getting through this month," he continued. "We've got the mortgage payment, the business, the club. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one you keep so you can impress people? That's not a necessity, Michael." He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe not, but the business," I cut in, "is your responsibility. And if it can't survive without my help, maybe it shouldn't survive at all. The silence stretched. His eyes searched mine for some crack of softness, but there was none left to give. The turning point that night, I sat on my bed and thought about the way he'd looked. Not angry, not even truly apologetic, but desperate. And I realized something. Revenge wasn't about making him hate me. It was about making him respect the weight I'd carried for him all these years. But respect is earned through lessons, and lessons are rarely painless. I wasn't done yet. The final straw for Isabella a few days later, I overheard another fight. This one worse than the rest. Isabella was shouting, her voice thick with frustration. "You told me we were fine. You told me your dad would always help." "Well, he's not," Michael barked. "Maybe if you hadn't called him a burden," she began. But then she caught herself. There it was. She knew, and he knew, she knew. The cracks in their marriage weren't my doing. I'd simply removed the glue holding them together. By the end of that month, Michael had lost his club membership, was struggling to keep the mortgage current, and was drowning under the looming business audit. And he still hadn't seen the full extent of what I had in store. Some people learn from gentle nudges. Michael was not one of them. For him, the lesson had to be a collapse. Loud, undeniable, and permanent. By the time the month turned over, all 3 dominoes I'd set up were tilting toward the floor. All it would take was a little push to send them toppling. The audit report, it started with the audit. My lawyer called one Wednesday afternoon, a faint note of satisfaction in his voice. "Dennis, I think you're going to find this interesting," he said. "We've completed the review of M&H Automotive's records. There are discrepancies." Discrepancies was a polite word for what they'd found. Missing invoices, unreported income, tax filings that looked like they'd been scribbled by a teenager. Because I was a partner, the report was mine to do with as I pleased. I didn't have to hand it over to the IRS, but I knew exactly how to make Michael feel the threat. That evening, I walked into the main house with a manila envelope in my hand. Michael was at the table, sorting through bills. "What's that?" he asked. "Your audit results," I said, placing it in front of him. His hands hesitated before opening it. As he read, I watched the color drain from his face. "This could shut me down," he whispered. "Or you could fix it," I replied. "But you'll need money, a lot of it." The unspoken truth hung in the air. I wasn't giving him a cent. The banks knocked 2 days later. The bank made its move. The refinancing deadline had passed, and Michael had failed to secure a new agreement. I heard the knock at their front door before I saw the uniformed man on the porch, clipboard in hand. Michael stepped outside, closing the door behind him, but the voices carried. "Sir, this is a formal notice. Without payment, the foreclosure process will begin within 60 days. I stayed in my seat, sipping my tea, pretending not to hear. But when Michael came back inside, his face was tight, his jaw clenched. "They're bluffing," he muttered, more to himself than to me. But we both knew they weren't. The public unraveling, the real breaking point, came at the town's annual business networking gala. Michael had been attending for years, always boasting about his thriving shop. This year, however, word had spread about the audit. Small towns have a way of making bad news travel faster than good. I arrived early, standing quietly at the edge of the room, watching. When Michael walked in, there were no warm greetings, just awkward smiles, half nods, and people quickly turning away. The club manager, who'd suspended his membership, was there too, and made no effort to hide the disdain in his expression. The moment that sealed it came when a local supplier, a man Michael owed money to, approached him in front of the entire room. "Mike, I've been trying to get a hold of you," the supplier said loudly. "When are you going to pay that invoice from last quarter?" The room went quiet. Michael stammered something about cash flow issues, but the damage was done. His image, the one he'd clung to for years, shattered in front of his peers. Isabella's departure that night, I heard shouting from the main house. Isabella's voice was sharp, brittle. "I'm not living like this, Michael. I didn't sign up to watch everything fall apart. You think this is my fault? He's doing this on purpose. No, you did this when you pushed him away." The next morning, her car was gone. A single suitcase was missing from the hallway. Michael didn't mention it, but the silence in the house was heavier than it had ever been. The final conversation. 3 days later, Michael came to the guest house. He didn't knock, just stepped inside like he had when he was a kid. But there was no anger this time, no false pride. He sat down across from me and stared at the floor. "I get it," he said finally. "You were never a burden. I was. I didn't see it, or I didn't want to. I thought you'd always be there to fix things. I didn't say anything. I've lost almost everything," he continued. "The business might go under. The house, I don't know if I can keep it." Isabella, his voice cracked, but he stopped himself. "I don't have anyone else to blame but me." For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who came to me with scraped knees, looking for comfort. But I also saw the man he'd become, shaped by years of my enabling. "I can't fix this for you," I said quietly. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. You need to learn how to stand on your own. Because one day, I won't be here at all." He nodded slowly. No argument, no pleading, just acceptance. Why, I didn't finish him off. I could have taken more. I could have handed that audit report straight to the IRS, let them dismantle what little remained of his business. I could have pushed the bank to move faster, had the house sold out from under him before winter. But I didn't, not because I forgave him. I hadn't, but because I wanted the lesson to stick. Total ruin leaves nothing to rebuild from. What I left him with was just enough to start over, if he had the strength to try. That night, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't in taking everything from him. It was in making him understand the value of what I had given, and how easily it could be gone. And from the look in his eyes that day, I knew he finally understood. 2 weeks after Michael and Isabella moved into their cramped rental, the first real cracks began to show. The grass in the front yard grew wild. The blinds hung crooked in the windows. And for the first time in years, Michael's once proud face looked small. I hadn't spoken to them since they left my house. No calls, no texts, nothing but silence. The same kind they had once given me when they didn't want me around. But through a few old friends in town, I heard whispers. The rent was high, the commute was longer, and Isabella was bitter about losing her dream home. Michael had been taking on overtime shifts at work, but without my quiet help covering gaps, the bills were catching up. One chilly Thursday morning, I received an envelope in the mail. It was a letter from Michael. The handwriting was messy, the tone almost apologetic. "Dad, I know things have been bad between us. I messed up. We both did. Isabella didn't mean what she said. I didn't mean what I said either. We were stressed, and it came out wrong. We're struggling. I was hoping maybe we could meet up and talk." I sat at the kitchen table, reading it twice. Once as a father, and once as the man he'd called a burden. A year ago, I would have dropped everything, forgiven instantly, and rushed to help. That's what fathers do, isn't it? They give, and they give, until there's nothing left. But now, I realized something important. Forgiveness didn't mean I had to forget. The next day, I agreed to meet him. Not at my house, and not at his new rental, but at the same small cafe where I'd celebrated buying his first home with him years ago. When I arrived, he was already there, wearing an old hoodie and looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His coffee sat untouched. "Dad," he started, voice low. "I'm sorry," I nodded. "I know you are." He fumbled with his cup, clearly unsure what to say next. We need help. I'm behind on the car payments." "And Isabella," I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Michael, I will always love you. But love doesn't mean I have to keep saving you from the consequences of your choices." His jaw tightened. "So that's it. You're just letting me drown." I leaned forward. "You told me I was a burden. You made me feel unwanted in a home I helped you build. Do you understand how that feels? How deep that cut goes?" He looked down at his hands. "I was wrong. Yes," I said. "But being wrong has a price. You have to pay it, not me." The silence between us was heavy. He wanted me to give in. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he had when he was a boy asking for something he knew he shouldn't have. But this time, I didn't bend. Instead, I slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a single piece of paper, a list of the things ID taught him over the years. How to work hard, how to keep your word, how to treat people with respect. At the bottom, I'd written, the most important lesson: never forget who helped you get where you are, and never make them feel disposable. He read it, lips pressed tight. So you're not helping. I took a sip of my coffee. I already have. More than you know. Now it's time for you to help yourself. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. I walked out into the crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in months. In the weeks that followed, I heard they'd sold the fancy car, downsized again, and started budgeting properly. And though part of me wanted to swoop in and make it all better, I stayed away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the life they VA built without a safety net. Months later, on my birthday, Michael showed up at my door. No envelope, no excuses. Just him, holding a plain cake from the grocery store. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said quietly. We sat, ate, and talked about small things. He didn't ask for money. He didn't complain about his life. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of the man ID always hoped he'd become. Not because I rescued him, but because I finally stepped back and let him grow. Some people say revenge is about destruction. I disagree. My revenge was on T about ruining Michael S.'s life. It was about making him live it. And in the end, that was the lesson he'd never forget. If this story hits you in the heart, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family? Like this video if you believe respect should never be optional. And subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that prove sometimes walking away is the best revenge.